Okay, this video is called CS Lewis and JRR Tolkien, the Inklings, Academic Heroes. Inklings was a group of writers, Christian writers at Oxford University in the mid-1900s that would meet together every week and talk about books, talk about the books they were writing, talk about literature, their ideas, current events, and whatnot. C.S. Lewis, his full name is Clive Staples Lewis. He lived from 1898 to 1963. And he had fought in World War I, as had J.R.R. Tolkien and a lot of men of those generations. C.S. Lewis in real life went by the name of Jack. He was actually from Ireland. He was born in Belfast, so he was Protestant. His mother died when he was only 9 years old, and then his father sent him to a boarding school, and he hated it. He was a very lonely kid. But sometimes loneliness can be good for a person's intellectual development. Luckily, he liked reading. And his teachers of that age said that he read more than any student they'd ever seen or heard of. That's a common thing, is that persons that later on develop a great intellect go through a phase of prolonged loneliness where they read a tremendous amount. When you start studying like the biographies of genius, you'll see that's a very common thing, that they're sort of socially abandoned in a certain phase and they just read like crazy, or that they had a parent who really encouraged them to read a tremendous amount and talked about books with them, like the mother of John Ruskin, had him read the Bible every day, and the guy became kind of an incredible writer and speaker. Okay, let's see, some quotes from C.S. Lewis. He says that true readers will often read a book more than once if they really like it, and some books actually cause a turning point in their life. Writers feed on reading. Yeah, somebody who really likes reading, it's like a necessity. I can't get into my car without an audiobook. Okay, C.S. Lewis, he wrote most famously the Chronicles of Narnia. And the Chronicle of Narnia, of course, were made into a movie. I like the first one. The second one, I don't even remember it that well, but the first one I thought was quite good. Let's see, he became a professor of English literature at Oxford and of medieval and Renaissance literature at Cambridge. And even though he was the most popular professor in the whole University at Oxford, they wouldn't give him the full professor job, maybe because he was from Ireland. It's not uncommon that the Irish get kind of screwed in England. C.S. Lewis' most famous books are The Chronicle of Narnia and Mere Christianity. He wrote a whole bunch of other ones. Some of them were pretty good. My father used to read his books, and my father kind of got me reading his books when I was young. I enjoyed Chronicles of Narnia and felt like I understood it. The other ones I would read, Screwtape Letters, Mere Christianity, I didn't quite understand them when I was young. I was just, reading it so I could talk to my dad. It was like a big deal for me to talk to my dad because he worked a lot. And so when I would see him, I would look forward to discussing what I had read or he had sort of offered me to read if I was interested. So anyway, C.S. Lewis said that contraception is to Christianity what Balin's Dolores Stroke was to the kingdom of King Pelham. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about, mythology and whatnot and King Arthur legends and stuff. So what he basically said is oral contraception is going to wipe out Christianity in his opinion, because they won't have any kids and they'll end up being replaced by other populations. So, okay, that was just one thing he said. All right, Christians live in enemy-occupied territory. The true Christian church is an underground movement. C.S. Lewis, who knows what book that came from right there. We are what we believe we are. And I'm going to get with some better stuff with C.S. Lewis. I'm starting out a little slow to give you the background, but I'm later going to share with you some interesting stuff that he did. There's a whole course on C.S. Lewis at greatcourses.com. Taught by, I think, Louis Marcos. It's pretty good. He loves C.S. Lewis. I like C.S. Lewis a lot, but I don't love him. Very often, the only way to get equality in reality is to start behaving as if you had it already. I like the idea of the Inklings, where they met to... I'm the wrong thing. They met to discuss their writing projects and, literature in general. So that's a good thing. All right, so continuing with C.S. Lewis. The only people who achieve much are those who want knowledge so badly they seek it when the conditions are unfavorable. Favorable conditions never come. Yeah, everybody's stuck doing tedious stuff because they have to make money to pay their bills. And they got responsibilities. I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. C.S. Lewis. Write only about what really interests you and nothing else. C.S. Lewis. Yeah, that's a good quote. And that kind of ties into Schopenhauer's ideas about the only writers who write anything worthwhile are the ones who do it out of pure interest. Anybody who does it for professional reasons, almost always their books suck. It is the liberal arts, not the vocational training, that preserves civilization by producing reasonable men and reasonable, responsible citizens. Yeah, that's an important point. People need a liberal arts education in order to have like a well-rounded understanding of the world and the ability to write well and be articulate. Okay, now I'm going to give you a little bit more extended quote from Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This is where he actually used to give radio shows about this. And he was pretty popular. He's a popular writer from all his books, and these lectures became very popular. Let's say like in around the 1940s, around that time. So here goes C.S. Lewis. Mere Christianity is more like a hall, out of which doors open into several rooms. If I can bring anyone into the hall, I shall have done what I attempted. Human beings, after all, have some sense, and they see that they cannot have any real safety or happiness for themselves except in a society where everyone plays fair. And it is because of this that they see they have to try to behave decently. Ever since men were able to think, they've been wondering what this universe really is and how it came to be there. And very roughly, two views have been held. The first is called the materialist view. It's also the atheist view. That's what it really means. People who take that view think that matter and time and space and life have always existed and nobody knows why, and that matter behaving in certain fixed ways has just happened as a sort of fluke to produce creatures like ourselves who are able to think. The other view is the religious view. And according to the religious view, what is behind the universe is more like a mind than anything else we know. That is to say, it is conscious and has purpose and prefers one thing over another. And on this view, it made the universe partly for purposes we don't know, but partly to produce creatures like ourselves. And by that, I mean that have minds themselves. Wherever there has been thinking, men, both views will turn up. And then he goes on, C.S. Lewis. But progress means getting nearer to the place where you want to be. And if you have taken a wrong turn, then to go forward does not get you any nearer. If you are on the wrong road, real progress means to turn around and walk back to the correct road. And in that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. C.S. Lewis continues. It is after you have realized that there is a real moral law and a power behind that law, and that you have broken that law, and you have put yourself wrong with that power. It is after all this, and not a moment sooner, that Christianity begins to talk. Of course, I quite agree that Christian religion is in the long run a thing of unspeakable comfort. But it does not begin in comfort. It begins in dismay. I have been describing, and it is no use at all trying to go on to that comfort without first going through that dismay. God made us. God invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, and it will not run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel for our spirits that we're designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us happiness apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. This is the key to history. Terrific energy is expended, civilizations are built up, excellent institutions are devised, but each time something goes wrong. Some fatal flaw always brings the selfish and cruel people to the top, and it all slides back into misery and ruin. In fact, the machine conks. It seems to start up all right and then runs a few yards and then it breaks down. They are trying to run it on the wrong fuel. That is what Satan has done to us humans. So I give that as an aside. You can see that whenever some country tries to run on an atheistic system, it always ends up in tyranny. It always ends up in brutal cruelty and poverty and starvation. That's what always happens. Take a look at the French Revolution in the 1790s. It's a disaster. Take a look at, communism, all this stuff. It always ends up in a disaster. You just can't run humans on atheism. Then it just leads to selfish, brutal behavior, and it's a disaster, okay? So now he continues. He says, C.S. Lewis continues. He says, is Jesus Lord, liar, or a lunatic? I am trying there to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, like, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. C.S. Lewis says, that's one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a liar or a lunatic, on the level with a man who says he's a poached egg or the devil himself. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange and terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. Okay, C.S. Lewis continued. The central Christian belief is that Christ's death has somehow put us right with God and given us a fresh start. We are told that Christ was killed for us, that his death has washed our sins, and that by dying he has disabled death itself. That is the formula. That is Christianity. That is what has to be believed. Again, Christianity asserts that every individual human being is going to live forever, and this must either be true or false. And immortality makes this other difference, which, by the by, has a connection with the difference between totalitarianism and democracy. If individuals live only 70 years, then a state or a nation or a civilization which may last for 1,000 years is more important than the individual. But if Christianity is true, then the individual is not only more important, but incomparably more important, for he is everlasting. And the life of a state or a civilization compared with his is only a moment. And that's C.S. Lewis from Mere Christianity. And, what is being said here between the lines is the profound social importance of society's choice about morality and religion. Basically, Christianity is a religion that promotes the poor person, the little guy, okay, the big masses, the population, because it says he is equal in the eyes of God as the king. It says that, his life has tremendous meaning, all right? It says that he's entitled to natural right because he's created in the image of God, and therefore there's something partly divine in him. Atheism says, no, he's just a talking primate. Atheistic Darwinism, which is the main competing religion in popular society for agreed upon values. And it's already been accepted by the university system, by the corporate system, that mankind is nothing but a talking primate. Therefore, he has no rights except what is given to him. He is not right to anything. He's not right to free speech. He's not right to anything. Okay, that's an important point. And the average person doesn't understand that because they're ahistorical and they're uneducated. They don't know anything about religion or history. But it's pretty obvious that this is the case. And so, person needs to be aware of that because it has a big effect on their life. Okay, now we're going to go to J.R.R. Tolkien. So again, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis are combined together because they were friends for many, many decades, and they met for decades as part of this group called the Inklings. Inklings like writers. They call it inking. And there were other good writers in that group too. Owen Barfield, Charles Williams, and others who were sort of came and went with that group. But the whole thing was very nice. And what it reminds one of is like, earlier days in English literature. Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth. So before they wrote their lyrical ballads and whatnot, it's kind of a similar context, century earlier. All right, well, anyways, J.R.R. Tolkien lived from 1892 to 1973. He also had a sad story where he was orphaned at a young age, and he was then raised by a guardian under the guardianship of a Catholic priest. He served in World War I. He became a professor at Oxford. And then, like, almost kind of funny about him, he really hadn't read that widely in English literature after Chaucer. So he was very much interested in the old, earliest English literature, the Norse gods and all that stuff. He's a big fan of all these pagan myths and stuff. And here's a quote from Tolkien. He wrote, "Pagan myths are God expressing himself through the mouths of poets." So that's one of the great things about when you talk about stuff from the past. You know, the ancient Greeks, the Norse myths and all that, you can put more symbolism in it. People aren't so offended. It's like you have to be a little careful talking about modern stuff. People can get real offended in a hurry with that. J.R.R. Tolkien, he originally wrote The Hobbit to entertain his kids. The Shire is sort of like his English neighborhood village. The Inklings were the Oxford Christian writers, the literary movement. We talked about that. Their goal was to present Christianity through Romanticism. Okay, and Romanticism as a literary style is fantastic. You know, look at Victor Hugo in France, all right, and look at Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand will tell you she's a romantic realist. You know, it's sort of like you put the drama into real life, but that romantic emotional component makes it a lot more interesting and entertaining. So let's see. We talked about CS Lewis, and here he wrote Lord of the Rings, finished about 1949, published in 1955. So he wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien really developed this whole new genre, almost invented it. And he still sells millions of books. In just 1 year, he would sell over 4 million books. Today, J.R.R. Tolkien. That Lord of the Rings is like the most popular book ever written in the 1900s. Now, I would just let you know, I actually preferred the Chronicle of Narnia movie over Lord of the Rings. I enjoyed it. But, you know, okay, a couple more quotes of Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. If you do not believe in a personal God, the question of what is the purpose of life is unaskable and unanswerable. Okay, so yeah, having religion, it answers your metaphysical questions, and those are pretty important to answer. Who am I? What is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What should I do with my life? Okay, and then here's another line from Lord of the Rings. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness to bind them. Okay, so yeah, he had a lot of clever writing. He was actually a great writer. So anyways, what was that all about? Well, you know, the Lord of the Rings is a lot like about communism, because basically, in his own way, George Orwell wrote about communism, first in the allegorical sense with Animal Farm, later in the more direct, overt sense with 1984, and J.R. Tolkien wrote about it in his Lord of the Rings. And so, you know, the sort of the Sauron and the Mordor and all that stuff was, they saw, you know, communism, sort of the patterns coming out of Russia, what came out of Germany and Italy for a while, this totalitarianism, atheistic totalitarianism, being a disaster for the modern world. So here's a multiple choice test question. In the modern world, what is the ring to rule them all? Is it A, cell phones, B, internet and Wi-Fi, C, credit cards, D, GPS, E, centralization? Next one would be electric cars. The next one would be all of the above.